I didn't know how far back you wanted to go to the story why we bought the locker.
I think it should start from the beginning, don't
Sure.
you think?
Because why we bought the locker is interesting. It was just fate. We had no intention of going out and buying a locker.
That's how I think it should start.
Rick had already retired, and my dad had bought his portion of the locker. So my dad was in on the locker part of the locker when they sold it to Tom and Joni.
So was it just a locker? Was it a grocery store, retail area also? at
No,
that time?
just a locker, but the grocery store was on half and there was a door between the two.
Right.
And that was up on Main Street?
Right.
Or
Yeah, where Carl's store is now, the first half of it would have been the grocery store, and the second half was the locker. There was a front entrance, there were steps, and that's the building that burned in that big Thanksgiving Day fire. And so maybe we should tell why we bought the locker. Tom, remember we were farming out at Mrs. Hatch's farm, and Tom had cleaned all the corn husk around the crib that day. And I had worked, and I just come home from nursing, and he said, come down, I'll show you what I did today. And he had raked up and all, and he had been burning all that stuff. And it was finished burning, there was a little smoldering, but we walked between that and the brand new corn crib, a new one, and as we walked back up into the house, there was an old machine shed between the crib and the house, and there was an explosion and fire came shooting out, just like that. So he ran to get his tractor out, and I ran in the house, grabbing onto Terry because he wanted to follow Tom, and got in the house and dialed. And back then, you went through an operator. And so I told her, and she's ringing, and nobody answered. And I said, ma'am, I've got to go upstairs and get my two kids napping because I could feel the heat in our house. And so I get up there and got the kids down, came back, and I'd given her my name and our address before I left the phone. I came back on, I said, did they answer? She said no. Well, luckily the Arlington fire chief had been driving by. He got into Edgewood and pulled the alarm. So that night, in talking to the fire department, because now the corn crib burned, which shouldn't have to. So we went ahead then, and I asked the firemen, they said, what did you hear? And I said, a regular ring, and they said no. It should have been one long blast until we answer. And I said, no, it was a regular ring. So then I knew Mrs. Hatch was going to be upset with us. So I went to the operator, and it took me about 2 days and umpteen phone calls. And I finally got the lady that took my call, and she said, well, I'll check on it. Another day, and I get a phone call, and she said, I'm the manager, and ma'am, I'm sorry to tell you, but we had a wrong number posted for the Edgewood Fire Department.
Mhm.
And that, Tom came uptown a few days after that, and because people were telling that they had seen Tom burning, and they knew he had left it unattended, and that's why the fire started.
Mhm.
That wasn't true, but you know how.
I got accused of being a firebug.
Yeah. So we heard the locker was for sale. He came home one day and said, should we buy the locker? And so a farmer and a nurse bought the locker. So talk about fate. I mean, we had no intention, but we just knew with that history of the fire and all that she was going to blame us. And
She did.
so, yeah, she did. So we moved, and yeah, so that is how we got started. And I can remember, Tom, do you remember how Everett was going to stay with him for as long as he needed to get him going? And remember after 2 weeks you came home one day and you were so, because he said, you're on your own, Tom, and probably the best thing he did, but he didn't stay as long as Tom thought. Do you remember that?
It was the best thing he ever done, though,
Yeah?
because then he wasn't there to answer. All I do is keep asking him. He told me later about it, the reason he done it, because he said, hell, you wasn't doing it yourself, and I was doing it, telling you. This way, he said, you're on your own. Kind of pissed me off, but he said, that's the way I made it the best, because I didn't have him to ask all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why he done it. It worked out, though.
3 years after that, the government came in and told us we had to redo the cooler walls in that uptown building. Well, obviously, Everett and your dad didn't want to put any money in it, and we didn't want to do it, put money in a building we just rented. So then we found out about that old creamery, but we had a problem. Was because we had just put our basement, we lived in our basement. When this started, we built a hole in the ground and we lived in our basement house for those 3 years.
I remember that well.
Yeah, and Tom, you remember Jimmy Adams came? You want to tell that, how he came and told us to get out of the basement?
Jimmy Adams hated my basement. All he'd tell me is, you can't live in a hole in the ground. You can't live in a hole in the ground. So one day I had to sign some papers or something, and he come up.
He came up to the basement and
Went down the
wrote his
basement.
sweater on, thinking he was going to.
Next day he went downtown. Jimmy said, "I just seen that hole in the ground," and he said, "That ain't a bad hole." And from then on,
But then he borrowed us the
he
money
loved it.
so we could put the.
Before that, he
I was down there. It was a nice basement home.
yeah.
So we lived. Yeah. So then we borrowed money as far as the bank could. We borrowed $20,000 to build our house. Well, the bills weren't paid yet. Now we find this creamery that they wanted $5,000 for. You can only borrow so much from the bank. So then we went ahead and lived about a week in there. We thought we were going to have to fold because we couldn't borrow enough money to buy that old building and redo it. 2 people in Edgewood are really responsible for us getting us through this one. Mert and Jane Miller we got all our carpeting from them, and they said, "Don't worry about what you owe us. We will hold you." Gene Stanton managed the lumber yard. He said, "Don't worry about what you got your lumber bill. We'll carry you." With those 2 doing that, and there was an old Edgewood Economic Development Corporation that could come up with $5,000, and we got another little bit more from the bank. We were able to pull out another $25,000 to finish the lockers. So Jane Miller and Gene Stanton are very important in the history of the Edgewood Locker. And Tom, you can tell what you did to that building down there. You did all that work on it.
Oh God, it was nothing but a shell. I mean, as far as that goes. Put all new walls in it, and floors, walls, and ceilings, everything.
Built the freezer.
Yeah, built all the building colors.
And didn't you add on the holding pins?
Yeah,
Was that new?
I don't know how many times we added on down there.
Well, I think I looked, it was 6 times. It seems like, and that was the other thing. The year we bought the locker, within a year we had doubled what had been done the previous year. And every year we grew. Every year we did more and more and more processing. Then we started adding on down there.
Yeah.
And every 3 years we build something, get it paid off, borrow some more money, build another addition. And you remember what, I think it was 6 total additions. And you remember why we ended up moving? Do you remember why we ended up moving out of the old locker? The floor and the freezer
Oh, yeah,
was
the floor.
expanding
Yeah.
because by all our additions, we had blocked off the flow of air. That's the new locker, those pipes out front. Well, that old one, I guess, had some at one time, but they were so,
And we went around it many
we had
times.
it on every side of the building.
Couldn't get no air underneath it.
And,
Starting to heave.
yes, and the carts wouldn't, they were
Yeah, you race you back to the door, everybody
And
was
plus,
laughing.
we were getting so big, and the smoked meat. Remember, Tom, you couldn't roll anything into the smokehouse. Everything had to be hand lifted. Can you? Everything.
Well, every doorway.
Yeah.
yeah,
Every
separate.
doorway had a sill.
Yeah, there was a lip on every doorway.
And I remember the first time we built on the north, I was going to get an office. Finally, I wouldn't have just that desk by the front door. It was in my dream for about 2 weeks, and they decided they needed more processing room. So they took it for processing room. That first addition north of the processing area. So, and how about telling them about Elsheimer's and how we used to send our curing out? You remember that?
What?
About Elsheimer's? Wasn't that the name of that place that
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
That's where
Remember?
where
You remember that, don't you, Tom? How we used to send our
Where
meat up
you
there?
send your dried beef and your bacon and stuff to get cured.
Oh yeah, that all went out. It went to Alzheimer's, yeah.
For quite a few years. And then when the boys joined us, they finally said, hey, it's time to do
But I
it.
bought it, we bought a smoke. I bought an old smokehouse, and we used that for a couple of years. Between that and Alzheimer's. Then we bought the new stainless steel, and the boys, we took over and went to doing it all ourselves. Otherwise, Alzheimer's down with us.
When we bought the locker from your dad and grandpa, remember that desk, and there was a big glass on top of the desk, and underneath it was a postcard. I saved it, but I couldn't find it today, and on it said, "Success is being able to operate a business in the black, despite being constantly told how to do it by a government always in the red." And I've always thought of that. Everett had that under the glass on that desk. And I did save that, and I thought I knew where it was, but I couldn't find it. But that was what it said, and that really impressed me. When the kids were little, well, probably Judy Judy would hang in the basement, and I think the boys did too, once in a while, watch you butcher in the basement of the Uptown.
Yeah, Judy used to hang on the fence down there
I think she
watching
was the
butcher.
one. I think the boys were pretty much in school
Yeah.
then, but she was the one, and she'd hang down there and watch them. And one time you had a wild beef, and I remember you had to stick one of the kids in a barrel.
My.
I remember Johnny took her to the bank one day after I was butchering. What'd you do? Tell them what you get out.
She always would say heart, liver, and tongue. And when and that day I said, Judy, tell the girls, this was in the bank where Whisker Cafe Rosate is known. And I said, tell the girls what Daddy gets when he butchers a beef. Guts. Clyde didn't say what I thought she would.
Guts.
But every year we've been in business, we grew. It was just mind-boggling.
And we don't even want to talk about deer.
At first, we didn't.
When did
want
you
to
start
do
deer? Do you remember? What year?
We were down below yet. I mean, quite a while down there doing deer. For several years of being reluctant to handle deer, we finally realized its potential. In the late 70s, we could see that deer processing was another avenue for the locker to pursue. A big factor was the fact that by then we were making our own summer sausages and so forth. The rest is history.
And we really didn't have to do too much advertising.
Was there ever a time, Tom, that you wondered if you were doing the right thing, or did you say, what did I get myself into? Every day, huh?
Oh, not too much. I mean,
What about you, Joni? Was there ever a day when you said, what did we get ourselves into?
Not really. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think I was trying to nurse and do the locker books. And I know it was so glad when you came on board.
Oh, no.
Yeah, no, and I think going back to building the locker, the fact the boys came in when they did, and we made them partners fairly soon after they joined us. And we would go to locker conventions, and other people would say, you guys are crazy. And because they would keep control, and they would, but you know, their kids eventually left and went to work for someplace else. And because the boys were part owners of the business, they just took the ball and ran with it. The smoke meat, the deer, so we were very blessed that way.
yeah, I worked out good.
Yeah.
All them guys, now that kids in the locker business, you guys say you're all, they'll never stay with you, and that's, and the boys took over, and those guys, most of them sold out, quit, gone, lockers are gone.
Terry and Jim's the way it made it the way it is today.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah, we made them.
Yeah, the last 20 years, yeah,
Well, we've been retired for 16 already.
Yeah.
Really?
yeah.
Yeah, we've been retired for 16.
Because I think we've been in the new building probably 20
20,
years.
yeah.
20 years they've been down there.
Remember we took that photo for the groundbreaking?
It was snowing.
Snow and cold, you couldn't see as far in front of your hand.
I can remember when the Rockies were putting the roof on, it was an ice storm, and they were putting that, and very windy and bitterly cold.
Oh, they took the rough on the locker.
I felt sorry for them that day.
Well, I was just telling David about that old milk truck we had out back of the locker, where the dock is now. I don't know where an old Swiss Valley. Anyway, we used to hang deer in there.
Oh,
It was
the box.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Between the touring building and back in the locker.
And I'll never forget this. Me and Jim were hanging deer in there that one night, and the rail broke. I had a deer, Jim had a deer, and I'm kind of all laying there all funky, and a deer laying on top of me. And Jim was looking at me kind of laughing. I said, how did I say that? I said, Where he said, "Do you need help or something stupid like that?" I said, "Well, yeah, it'd be nice. You got these damn deer off of me." He just stood there and laughed. I'm like, "Come on, Jim." Don't be for real.
Yeah.
I'm laying there. Oh God, he kicked up deer all over me. Oh, good Lord.
You talked about the floor earlier in the locker down in the north end of town in the freezer. And one morning we heard a big crash and we knew that Terry was in the freezer getting out a batch of meat. And so went down to the back and he was laying underneath a cart of hamburger trays. That's when we had the wire metal trays on the tall carts. And it had tipped over when he was trying to get it out of the freezer and he was laying underneath it. It was,
I don't think I ever knew
to get this
that.
off of me, but
Yeah, that little freezer floor was bad enough when they left.
Oh, it
You
was,
put the cart there, it'd beat you to the door.
yeah.
That's how bad that floor was.
Yeah,
It's like you'd have to
it
run.
The door just heaved.
It's crazy.
I think the hours, the thing I'm amazed at is the number of hours that they put in, that Jim and Terry and now Caitlin. It is a lot of hours. It takes a lot to run your own business, I know, and obviously you started that, you instilled that. You worked a couple of jobs trying to keep things going, and so I think that they saw it firsthand, that in order for your business to prosper, it's gonna
Well, if
take
you
your
wouldn't
whole
burnt the
heart
building
and soul.
One day, and I just heard this story a couple years ago, Terry went out back and Jim sat in front. The next day they were over it, and as you do that, they were back to their own stations and everything
Yeah,
was
that
fine.
happens all the time though with
Yeah.
families. I
Yeah.
mean, with the family working
Considering
in business.
everything, they had some differences, I know that, but all in all, if you look at the whole scheme of things, we're just proud that they worked together. Yes, they had differences once in a while,
Pretty,
but they worked together
pretty
most of the
damn
time.
well for
Yes.
for brothers.
For brothers, I mean, a lot of families would not.
They get along better for brothers than me and Mama did. Me and Mama time, when we had times.
Yeah. So, and in retrospect, it's just been a very humbling and quite the experience and looking back and all our employees was like one big family. We had the most dedicated employees. We were always optimistic,
Yeah.
always, actually, I was always optimistic. And always, if somebody wanted something new done, a new cut of meat or whatever, if I took a phone call, we always were looking forward to what, we were able to diversify. We learned we go to conventions and they would say, "You guys, you have got to start diversifying because just to be a meat processor." But then we went into retail, and so I think being able to diversify if need be and to obviously not be afraid to work, but to be optimistic and be.
Well, we have been so proud of the boys and the way they have developed the locker and taken such an interest, and just very, very proud and very humbled by the way it has grown. And in retrospect, looking back, we just realize how blessed we were.
Seed and
What?
I said you planted the seed and you instilled hard work.
And then now it's good that Katie's coming in as an owner, and we wish her the best.
And Hope and Mason.
And Payson is coming, working at the locker now, so we hope to see this continue for many, many years.